All right, everybody, we are live. Welcome to the Talk With Kiet podcast, where we connect people, ideas, and capital to make a difference in the world. The podcast interviews people with interesting life stories worth knowing, ideas worth sharing, and capital worth allocating. I'm your host, Kit Tran. Now, today I have two very special guests on our first episode. I am a personal advisor to their startup, and I'm a huge fan to the both of them, John Olesky and Steve Shyn. John is an industry veteran of the leveraged loan market and was managing director and co-head of IHS Market's loan settlement business. And Steve Shyn, Shyn is a 30-year veteran of the financial service industry, where he was managing director of Accenture Financial Services practice. Today, we will talk to John and Steve about their startup journey and learn more about their startup. John, Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Hey,
thank you.
Here.
Thanks for having us, kid.
Well, before we start, you're talking about pivot and startup, right? It's funny, you know, I posted on the public site why we were delayed for 15 minutes. I literally had a fire alarm go off at the house at 9:40. I had the fire department here, you know, we had the police here. Like, there was a chance that this podcast would not have gone live today at this time, but it did because we pivot. And that's really what startup is about. So, you know, before we start and dig into, John and Steve, your startup and what you're building, what I want to do is explore the journey of how you got to the point where you are now. So let's start with you, John. You know, you were living in New York, you had this amazing job and career, and now you're in Miami running a startup. Like, what happened? Like, midlife crisis hit you?
Well, I'm not going to say no to the midlife crisis point. Look, I think like many people in my head, I had, I'd always kind of looked upon entrepreneurship and startups as this like really amazing thing. Obviously, some of my personal heroes are entrepreneurs. And of course, you know, just a lot of things aligned at the same time, the pandemic, some personal change within my family. And it just seemed like the universe was giving me a sign that it was time to do something drastic, something big. And it wasn't just a career change; it was a life change. At least what I thought was called for. And so my parents do live in Florida, and I was visiting, and it just kind of hit. Maybe it's time. And of course, you know, the education I received at IHS Market and Market before that is unbelievable. And the leadership was amazing enough to let me depart in such a special and great way that it really opened me up for what was next. And I had no idea what was next. So, you know, a lot of people say they had all these like perfect ideas on what they want to do. I had no idea. That's probably not the best way to leave your really good job in a city you had been in for almost 18 years. But I was excited also about not knowing. I think there's a certain degree of anxiety that comes with it, but it's really awesome, the idea that you wake up and Steve and I, you know, we talk about this all the time. All of a sudden you wake up and you don't have that go to work obligation. You don't have that voice in the back of your head that says, get to the office, you have a call. Make sure you follow up on this item. All of a sudden it's you talking to yourself. You have to be the voice for you. I must get up. I must spend time on this. I must reach out to my network. I must consider what I'm going to do. I must explore opportunities. And if you're anything like me, I don't really like a lot of rules. But I do need a framework within to operate, and having to go to the office and have a bit of structure in my day was really valuable. And so decided to take the leap and be closer to family as well. And so I chose Miami, and I can talk a little bit more about the journey maybe a little later. But that was really the catalyst. It was a need for life change, and along with life change often comes career change, and that was it. So maybe a little bit of crisis in there as well.
Nice. Now, Steve, this is actually your second startup. So, you know, tell us about your first startup and how you end up working at Accenture.
Yeah, we had started out on our own. So I had it built in me, probably from my family years and years ago, the entrepreneurial spirit. Didn't know how to actually express it, but in 2012, hung a shingle with a good friend, and we built a small firm that eventually became a big firm. And so, kind of when Accenture came knocking, my mental state was really, I call it like founder or entrepreneur schizophrenia. I was like nuts. Like, right, it's just probably horrifically similar to like every founder and operator that's out there. You're thrilled to be the boss, but tired of being the boss. It's a lot of pressure for me to have kept things active and growing, because it's a hustle to get sales, get quality team members, and always do the right thing for your customers. So we found that we were spending a lot more time on admin and operations than on innovation. And it's the innovation part that I love. So in 2018, my business partner and I had been going at this for the greater part of our working lives, it felt like. So we had an opportunity when the head of banking at Accenture personally reached out to us and talked to us about how great it would be that our specific expertise in Accenture's global reach and ability to scale could work together. And it was great timing for us because we wanted to see the thing that we built and loved grow and prosper. We knew that we couldn't do it alone, and that really working with the right partners out in the industry was an important ingredient to help make this grow. So we took the plunge. Haven't regretted any of it. So we managed to make Accenture the largest and most trusted global lending and servicing practice, by combining our deep market expertise with the investment that we got from them. After a number of years, my heart and my interest still lie in journey and building. So that's when John and I we talked, and I just love the adventure of building things so much. So I was eager to take my first startup experience and apply it to the second one. Hopefully, get us through the pain points a little faster. But I just love what we do. So
yeah, Kit, can I add something to what Steve said?
Yeah, sure.
I think there's there's this sense of the entrepreneurial spirit. I think Steve talked a little bit about or mentioned the idea of wanting to be able to make decisions, of wanting to lead your own thing, forge your own path. And I think that's something you have to have inside you, because if you don't, it hurts every day if you don't really have that inside you. But the one thing that I would kind of let everybody know who's interested in moving into this space is that the journey also has its moments where you're lonely. It can be a really lonely place, even with a team around you. The moment you have the responsibility to make decisions and kind of pick up any task at any time, it can be lonely. And it's a big difference from maybe being part of a large team, a large corporate with a foundation and infrastructure. It forced me to rewire my brain. And I don't mean that as a passing comment. I had to rethink my views and my approaches to so many things that I had just taken as known for so long, in order to survive, in order to get past that hump. And now the old way seems foreign to me. Now it seems natural. I mean, it's been 2 years, but at the beginning, all of this seemed foreign. And one thing had to give, right? Either I was going to give in, or it was going to push me and beat me. Hopefully, I think I've overcome some of those challenges with a lot more to learn. But it's difficult. You have to rewire, and you have to be okay alone at times. It can be lonely.
So
even with a partner.
So what is the backstory? Like how the two of you managed to get together and all of a sudden, well, let's start something together. Like what's the backstory behind that?
Well, I mean, it's I don't know if it's going to be that amazing of a story. We didn't like bump into each other somewhere and we're wearing the same watch or something. It wasn't something clever like that. Steve and I knew each other from the industry. So conferences, common clients, socially, we got along. And ultimately, I also became a customer of his. And the relationship developed there. And we'd always talked about maybe some interesting ideas that could happen in the future, in a future in which we were outside of our current corporates. We didn't know if and when that would ever happen. And when I left my firm, I started advising some startups, and that was a really interesting thing for me, because the perspective that I had before as someone maybe being pitched to by a smaller company into a larger company, looking at an investment, looking at the advice I'd give them, was come up from a completely different vantage point. So it was exhilarating to be in the process of creating something as an advisor. And back to the rewiring of the brain. When you run a business or run a product, you're generally accustomed to making decisions and having those decisions kind of move things forward and follow. Rewiring your brain to be an advisor is also a really interesting task, because that's what you do. You give advice, but ultimately the senior leadership at that firm, the executives, are going to do what they feel best, and sometimes they don't take on all your advice, and that can be really difficult to start. But through the experience, I joined a lot of pitches to venture capital firms and corporate venture capital entities with the startups, and it was interesting. I didn't love the experience, and so I remember after one particular pitch, I was a little bit frustrated. It was a pretty junior person, hearing a pitch from a very experienced professional, and you could tell it wasn't going to get the correct consideration. I know this is cliche, but it is what it is. And I called Steve. Literally right after that meeting, I called Steve, and Steve was still in his very comfortable, really good job. And I said, Steve, let's start something to help founders. Let's start a fund. Let's start advisory. Let's do something where we can help, because I think we have a lot to give. And that was really the origin.
Yeah, I seem to remember there was a Korean restaurant, a bunch of cookie with a lot of mozzarella.
It must be a lot of alcohol,
yeah,
right?
A pitcher of beer and a question, hey, should we do this? And he asked me at the end of the pitcher. I said, okay.
It wasn't a lot. It was the exact correct amount, Kit. It was
you timed it. You timed. Okay,
it's all about timing. Yeah, but having conversation, to go into entrepreneurship, it takes a certain personality, and it's a combination of dreaming, and people who just generate ideas can see problems and solve them on the fly, but also have pretty thick skins. And when I met John and Kit, we all have the same type of personalities. We look the world the same way. These are the types of things that made it attractive for me to get into business with John, is that he exhibited the same characteristics, and I knew that from my experience that he would have my back, and we would be able to get through this thing. So that was great to find. Wasn't a hard decision.
No, that's awesome. So exactly, what is your startup? Like, what are you building? Who's your ideal customer?
How long is the podcast?
Like 10 hours.
Well,
10 seconds. 10 seconds.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you know me. I couldn't get past the first 3 words in 10 seconds. Look, I think that you take the core of what you're trying to be. I know that there's lots of really interesting motivational techniques to try to come up with who you are and your corporate identity and stuff like that. I read a post recently from a founder, and I forget who said it, but the idea was that he was saying how when he goes in and looks at a startup and they can recite their 10 principles on the wall, and there's literally like 6 employees. I think we wanted to be simpler than that. I think culture is going to form out of itself, but the one thing that you really do have to define is, what's your core mantra? What's your mission? What is the thing you could essentially do a litmus test against for everything you do going forward? For us, it was, we want to invest in builders, we want to advise builders, and we want to build ourselves, because quite frankly, we come from the world of building. It'd be, I think a little piece of me would die inside if we weren't building something on our own as well. So the startup is a startup, for builders by builders. And, we essentially will cover the gamut of services. We've been lucky enough to attract some really awesome people with really diverse skill sets. And, you'll be hearing a lot more of that. We're not going to do an impromptu live announcement right now, but we have a number of things yet to announce. But at its core, we will do those 3 activities. We will invest, we will advise, and we will, organically originate startups from within our world, and hopefully attract awesome operators to execute. I mean, Steve, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, I'll just add to that. That's a great answer, John. the way we do it is also important to us. I mean, we individually are pretty nice people, so beliefs and values are also going to drive us, right? So we believe in fairness, and we believe in diversity. We believe in a lot of things that just make a good community. So we want to build the community around this. I know a lot of people say that, but we actually live in and breathe that stuff. So advising and building is what gets us excited, but it's also how we do it. We need to be there at the end of the day and be proud to tell our kids, this is what we did and how we did it. Right? We want to make a positive impact to the community around us. That's all.
I would add one thing, and it goes back to, I hope that I'm also having the opportunity to speak to people who are working in large corporates and are considering, maybe the entrepreneurship path, because it's fresh in my past. But one of the things to keep in mind is when you start your startup, your frame of reference is that past experience, and you're building upon a foundation that your enterprise has set up for you. Whether it's corporate infrastructure like legal and HR and finance and accounting and all the awesome people that do those jobs that, quite frankly, I have a supremely enhanced appreciation for after having to do it myself. But also the idea that you have frameworks, you have vendor relationships, you have infrastructure, you have servers, you have all these things, and you get to just move forward with a new business idea that's built upon other things. That's awesome. And when you come from that space, that's the mentality you still have. You're like, oh, we could start this, we could start that, we could do this. I know what it takes to do this. And then all of a sudden you come to the realization that it has nothing to do with that anymore. It's a completely different enterprise and different exercise. And it's okay. It's just different. So you really do have to rein yourself in with a lot of the ideas that you have, because you're like, well, what can I practically do? Right? I don't have a sales team of 100. I don't have an implementation team of 40. I don't have those things. So what can I practically do that can get started? That initial spark that I can grow from, rather than trying to have a roaring fire from the beginning. I mean, Steve and I talk about this all the time. I'm like, oh, I wish I had that team or that thing. And it's like, well, we'll have to build that team, and it'll take time. But you have to be prepared for that. Again, back to that rewiring of the brain.
So this is an interesting point, John. So actually, for both you, Steve, and John, the people you hired, Steve, when you were at Accenture, a large enterprise, or John at iJust Market, how different are they going to be to the people you're going to hire now as a startup? Like, what are some of the key differentiating traits?
I think I see, our startup going through different phases, right, and inflection points. A lot of the people who I worked with and hired at my old firm, I love all of them, and they were great at what they did. But not all of them are entrepreneurs and can deal with the uncertainty of, I'm going to get paid in equity a little bit more than I'm going to get paid in salary. I have mortgages to pay. So I think they would be perfect employees to come later when you're maybe going through Series A scaling, Series B scaling, and there's a lot more stability in the company. So I think the people that you need to hire at the beginning, strong teammates with good differing points of view. We have to put in a culture that makes it safe for them to talk to each other, but really they can live comfortably within the early stages, because there is a lot of uncertainty. You don't really know direction. You have to be part of that team that contributes to setting that direction on a day-to-day basis. And so I think people have natural proclivities to do one thing or the other. So I could see all the people that work for me in the past eventually working for the company or companies like this as they scale, but maybe not all of them at this point.
Yeah, I think I would echo that, but I would add a twist. I would say, in the same way that we shifted from a world with heavy corporate backing into one where we were able to dive into, the unknown. Other people could have that interest in that trait too. But to Steve's point, when I've had discussions with people about the possibility of joining, a number of them had said, look, it's a little uncertain. I need a little bit more stable footing. I have responsibilities. I have mortgage payment. I have kids. I've got school. I've got whatever that is. And you have to respect that. I mean, it's a completely different journey, and that's completely okay. We're all wired a little bit differently. So I think that, though, I've worked with a lot of really amazing people, just like Steve has. We'd all love to hire all of our old team and have that like comfortable sweatshirt that you put on a cold Saturday. Like, again, it can't be like that again. So I do think that I've always found it funny how much people's paths cross in the future. You always, when you're a junior person and you look up to all the executives at your firms, and you realize they've worked with each other at like 6 other companies, and you're like, oh, okay, that's amazing. I think that interweaving is actually critical to the fabric of successful companies. I think it's really important. So I'm excited to see which paths cross again from past teammates.
Yeah.
But Steve's right. I mean, the right time for people to like have their paths weave in with yours. Who knows what that is? Maybe it's now. Maybe it's 2 years from now or 5 years from now. You don't know.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talk about all the time is like contextual reference points. Like, we've all grown up in the industry building companies a certain way and been around people that have built companies a certain way. But if you look at what's happening in the blockchain world and the kids around NFTs and how they're engaging the world, you really need to mix the old ways of thinking with the new ways of thinking, right? That contextual reference point is important, because the way, if you think about like the younger generation engaging the world from 15 to 25 years old, in 10 years from now, they'll be the 25 to 35 years old. That's a core of the working world. And the way that they're engaging the world right now is the way they're going to demand and want to engage the world in 10 years from now. So you as a startup need to understand that, because if you build to the way that people used to think about it 10 years ago and think that that will survive in 10 years, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed. So having that contextual reference point and always challenging that with the build of the teams is going to be important.
Yeah.
You raise a good point. Sorry, go on, John.
No, I was going to say the balance is really important. I think, we also, of course, we advise and we've invested in some firms as well. And the ones that we've seen have the greater probability of success do have that blend of the people who have some startup experience, understand what it's like to work with fewer resources, less structure, more speed, but they've balanced it with that kind of more practical, tangible, corporate, real world experience that tackles the type of customer they're going after. The ones that swing completely in either direction, it's a toss up. One of the startups that I advised, I advised a number during that 2-year period, but one of them, didn't really know how to get into banks, for example. They had never done it before. And of course, for us, it's second nature. We have lots of contacts. We understand how to move the mechanics of getting service agreements and contractual foundations and how to pitch to the right party. We take that for granted. We think that's easy because we got such a great education at our firms. But for most people out there doing startups, it's not necessarily something they know, which is why they're always in need of great advisors. And for anybody out there who has this like incredible experience that maybe they've taken for granted, there are a lot of startups. I promise you, there are a lot of startups that would love to have you in an advisory capacity, because this is an education that you've got.
No, totally. And so going back to the point that Steve mentioned, right? How different is it to start a company 10 years ago versus starting a company today, whether it's technology or hiring or talent and all of that? Like how would it be 10 years ago had you started this versus now?
How long is this podcast? Yeah, I'll start this time to break things up. It's from a technology standpoint, I think it's much easier because the tools and the techniques have advanced so much, right? So 10 years ago, we stuck in Java, C++, and there was just waterfall and agile was kind of new. But now the way that things are getting developed is amazing. Things in blockchain, if you listen to stories around things like Binance, they started in 2017 and bam, they're huge, and that took a tremendous amount of technology to do, but they were able to do it quickly. In terms of how you work with people, since people's been a theme today, that's different, right? So we've just gone through a pandemic. There's people looking for new ways to work, new places to work, and so the whole world is changing the way that they want to work and get rewarded for their time. And so I think that is tricky right now for us and the startups that we talk to, because a lot of them may have old world thoughts of, I need everyone to be in the office, which does have a tremendous amount of value in terms of team building and culture and things like that. But if the best engineers in the world are in Vietnam or South America or Dubuque, how do you actually then get the best people on your team? Because you also have a responsibility to your shareholders and to your employees to manage your burn, right? You have to manage your burn. You have to get the best value out of what you have to go forward. So I think that for me is a very, very difficult thing, more difficult than 10 years ago.
I was wondering and how long it would take for us to come up with or to mention like an industry, like a catchphrase or whatever, like managing the burn.
Managing the burn.
Or Dow, hiring team.
Yeah, the answer is 25.6 minutes. Yeah, if I could add one thing to that, when we embarked upon this journey and we had some ideas on things to build, so I'll talk a little bit about the building that we do. We have a lot of experience building software, and with really great teams. I was very lucky in my past to have worked with awesome folks in product and tech, and of course other disciplines. But I'm talking about building. But some of the things that you kind of took as normal. So, that there's ratios, and anybody out there who builds knows, there's typically an ideal number, a ratio of, let's say, engineers to business analysts or product managers, and QA staff to engineers. And it's all, it's a moving science, but it's when you get to the right mix on, because of the way that, you actually develop new things to create. However, for the last, let's say, 5-10 years, some of the startups that are no longer really startups are 6, 7, 8 years into their journey. A lot of firms have been building software and capabilities so that other people can build software and capabilities. And we've been hearing about it at conferences for years, right? Oh, you could develop using our ledger technology. Oh, you can develop using our no-code, low-code methodology. You've been hearing all these things. People are like, oh yeah, that's super interesting, super interesting. And then you're like, okay, well, when are these new startups going to actually use it? And some do, but we don't think enough. And so when we first embarked upon this journey, we had an idea of what we thought teams would look like. And of course, to Steve's point, how we'd manage our burn, how we could represent use of funds for our investment cycle. And then once we started digging into these new technologies, we said, listen, we're going to actually embrace building differently. We keep saying we're going to build differently. Are we going to actually build differently? And so we said, yes, we are. The moment we started looking at the tech, it completely, destroyed everything we knew, but in a good way. It's like move fast and break things, right? Or break things. Yeah, move fast and break things. So the idea was, well, what does the makeup of the team look like? It completely switched. And then additionally, what is the day-to-day relationship between people of different disciplines? We all know there's always a little bit of friction between the product side and the tech side, and that's natural. But in our way of operating now, our team is actually going to be forced to be attached like this. And when I discussed with one of our CTOs about that, we're super excited about that, because we actually think the relationships between these parties will change. It'll be completely different to what we knew. So to Steve's point about what people are accustomed to doing and how they build, like I couldn't be more excited about the idea of framing teams differently and actually having parties engage in a different way and develop a different relationship. I think it's going to be amazing. I wish more companies were trying to do that, because it's uncomfortable, and maybe we can do it because we're small and we're at the beginning. But it's a necessary change, I believe, for the future.
And so it's quite relevant to some of the questions that the audience has put in. So one question
There are questions?
Yeah. Best people or people who are best under the circumstance?
Yeah, I mean, I have a really strong view on this one. So Steve, I'll take this one. I've been talking a lot, but you get the next two.
Hey, I would have won the lotto had I guessed that.
When we say best people, some of the folks on one of my previous teams will probably giggle if they watch this podcast. We used to just hire the top talent, full stop. Top talent, domain expertise, experience, etc. And that worked sometimes. But a lot of times they weren't a fit. It just didn't work. So we specifically had a meeting, and I got up on my soapbox and I said, best people you want to work with, people you want to see every day. Now they have to have a certain skill set, right? They have to hit a minimum. But we actively changed that. And over the course of a couple of years, because it doesn't happen overnight, all of a sudden it was a great team. It was the team that it could have been. It was reaching its potential. So for me, it's great people first. I know it's cliche, but most firms don't do that. They look at talent. Talent solely. We look at the good person litmus test as a short circuit for everything else. It does not matter how talented you are if you don't qualify there. So good people is the first indicator, and talent maybe is the number two.
And Steve?
Yeah, I think it's best under the circumstance. I think, if you look at the world, we have over 7 billion people. So the actual idea of finding the best people is kind of a fantasy. I think there are a lot of qualified people out there. There's also, if you look at the way that technology changes and techniques change so rapidly, I think there's a lot of discussions out there. I see one of the comments in here that, the value of university of education is kind of decreasing, right? And one of the things that we are talking to some of the community colleges is about is looking at curriculum, because maybe they are better oriented around, if we give them a curriculum and say, hey, guess what? We need Python developers that know how to do development around mortgage lending. Do that class. We will bring content professors, curriculum, and speakers. You then get those people into the market. We have jobs for them. So it starts to look a little bit more vocational. Like Germany and Switzerland have a very successful track record on vocational education, where their structural unemployment has typically been lower than we have. They don't graduate a lot of history and poli-sci and English majors. They graduate people who can actually contribute to commerce and the society of the place that they live. And so I think the ability to kind of tap into that kind of ethos is important, right? So you need to find the right teams, but the right teams are not defined as the smartest people. They can be defined as the people who work the best together, that work the best together at the time for the project that you need to have at that moment. And that's where, I didn't say DAO before, but I also said DAO. DAO's like, they can pop up. They love solving problems and they can go away, because we heard this story about
can't help himself. Help himself.
There was a gathering of blockchain.
By the way,
kind of
a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. So those that didn't, just Google it, research decentralized finance and a lot of the way of work in the future, which is very interesting. Sorry, Steve.
No. It's sorry. I just assumed everyone in the world is smarter than I am. So I never defined these things. But there were stories around, how I talked about young people and how they like to work, and the way they like to work is in teams where they have common vision, common goal. And if one person loses, the entire team loses, but they can get really invigorated around a vision. So there was a story around, hey, let's build a game and let's make it commercial. And they did their Red Bull or whatever the kids are doing now, and they built a commercially viable game in 2 weeks, and they all felt like they won. And it's very complex. In-app purchases and video and audio communications between the different players. And so you look at that and say, okay, so how does that work? How do you raise those teams and do individual little pieces of functionality features, right? It's different. So if you think about the old way, I have my engineering team and I need them to build UI, UX, and then also database, and then also infrastructure and all this. I don't think that is reasonable. to believe that same team can matriculate between the different skill sets.
Yeah, but it's important to note that like the reason, and it kind of goes back to what I mentioned before, the reason they're able to do that is because there's an amazing tool set to build things that they can build upon, right? Most of these games, whether it's, putting in the idea of microtransactions inside, like there are frameworks that exist that you can port into your game idea, so you don't have to build everything from scratch. It kind of goes back to what we're talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
There are amazing firms and tools and offerings out there that let you accelerate your building. There's no need to recreate the exact same thing unless your company is literally recreating a new version of something that exists. So it's exciting to see what can be built by using things that have been, essentially, really built to a solid degree by other parties. I think collaboration is going to be the key, which I think is your central thesis.
Yeah, totally. And then one of the other questions from the audience is, and as you build and grow your team, how do you balance like growing and investing in the current team versus recruiting from the outside talent, right, to address some of your hyper growth needs?
That's a hard one. Why'd you ask me that one? I think the core is the way we've had a lot of discussions about this exact question, so I'm actually glad it was asked. There's the team that starts is going to carry the longest history of institutional memory. So let me say that again. The team that's there at the beginning is going to carry the longest history of institutional memory. And when you are a startup and you are 1 year in, 2 years in, 5 years in, those people that were there at the beginning carry the entire history of why, what, how, when, and where. So we think it's actually really important to make sure that the initial folks come in with a strong footing and feel like they're owners as well. So of course that needs to be a strong footing because they need to win when everyone else wins, right? We all win, to Steve's point. Mm-hmm. Over time, if you've hired the right people, they'll understand that an investment needs to be made in others to bolster and stand on the shoulders of what they've already built. But it all starts from a very respectful and very partnerial approach at the beginning. So the folks that we're bringing in, what we're calling, we've already hired our executive team for at least the first startup that we're launching. And right now they're looking at their level 2s, right? And those people are going to come in and they're going to feel like level 1s. And that's really important to us. And of course, this is a topic that needs to be discussed as well, because if you're thinking about a flat organization or very hierarchical, I would advise you to consider both options for different parts of the firm. I think whatever fits you best is going to work, but don't feel like you have to follow just one path. But you discuss this. From my standpoint, I think Steve will be the same. I will make less money for quite a while than people who work for me. That's okay. That's completely okay. And I think that the people that come in level 2 right at the beginning, who are going to feel more like owners, they'll probably understand that too.
Yep. I don't know, you can raise of hands, but how many of you have been like early employees in a company and come in later, and the people coming later are paid more, right? So you're getting your bump of inflation 3%, 4% every year, but because they came in the next year, they got 20%. And so that's a very old way of thinking your team, that you only mark to market your new people. You have to mark to market your entire team, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone has a value, right? So you have to think about that, and it is a different way to balance the way you think of it. And that's only on the compensation side. You have to remember that people are motivated by different things, right? Being respected by managers is a huge thing that people often overlook. The things that are free are sometimes the most powerful things that you can do for people who work for you. Asking them, do you have all the tools? And do you have everything you need to be successful at your job, can make people extremely happy and valued. And if you train your managers and the people who manage people to always do that and make sure that they stop every employee, doesn't matter from top to bottom, do you have everything that you need to be successful at your job? You create a value culture, right? That people do feel differently about the company. So you have to be a student of human nature, behavior, motivation in order to kind of manage teams. It's not just about money. Money doesn't move people.
Yeah, and transparency. I mean, personally, over the course of my career, when I've had to deliver, maybe difficult news or less than ideal news, the more transparent I've been, the more the team has gotten behind challenging times. I think that's really important. So the good times and the bad times, the good messages, the bad messages, they all have to be delivered with a certain expectation from your staff of transparency. And then they're in on the joke, right? They're in on the mission. They're there with you. And I think that's really important. The idea of thinking of staff or employees or something to that effect versus partners, co-builders. It's not something that you have to say and print everywhere. It's just something that you have to behave as. And I think people react to that, to Steve's point.
That's right. Hey, sorry, someone typed in Kit can relate to that. So I know I wasn't asked the question, but I'll give my view, right? I think when I look at things, it's really what got you here will not get you there. And whatever stage you're in the startup, listen, I joined IHS Market when we were 40, 50 person startup to us being, a $44, $45 billion company with 17,000 employees around the world. And so whatever stage you're at as a startup or as you mature, you're going to need a different set of talents and skills and capabilities. And what you want is you want to be careful of saying, well, just because you've been here the longest, right, you can slack off and really have that memory ingrained and never have to work again. Right? Everyone needs to earn their brownie points no matter what point or stage they're at. But what you want as an institution is to continue to invest in those that's been with you the longest and loyal and still are willing to commit and evolve who you are as a firm. Because I can tell you, when Market started as a firm, it was very different, right, to where it last landed when it was acquired by S&P in the end of February this year. And so I think the answer is really a balance, right, in terms of you need to maintain loyalty to people that's been with you since the beginning as early as possible, but it's those that's willing to commit and evolve with you as a firm and not be saying, well, I wish we were still stuck as a small company. I hear a lot of this comment. I wish we were 20, 30 person, 50 person. No, I don't, right? I actually love that we're successful and we're doing well and we're growing, and let's evolve together as we grow. So I think it's important for us to create that balance and that loyalty and the opportunity and the growth. And both John and Steve, to your point as well, it's not just about money, right? It's about other things as well. So let's pivot a bit. Let's talk about, the two of you particularly. What's the most nerve-wracking thing about launching a startup?
Besides fundraising, right? All right, fundraising can't be the answer. Let's something else.
That's right.
Oh, you go first this time. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, well, for me, it's sequencing, right? So there are a lot of paths to the future, and getting this sequencing right is nerve-wracking to me, right? I would love to be Doctor Strange. Remember him in the Avenger movies where he went to the million paths into the future and tried to figure out the right one. But I'm not Stephen Strange. I'm only the mortal Stephen Shyn. So
well, that's Kit's favorite.
Yeah,
Marvel
it
character.
is.
Well,
okay,
that's
great.
That's right.
I hit on it. But it's hard to sit there and it's hard to start, but then once you start, you're like, oh shit, can I swear on this? Yes, shit.
It's adult channel.
Yeah, I don't know what to do next. Do we build MVP or do we build a database the correct way? How do we actually get to our next funding round? What is the best chess moves to play? Because I view our startup world as a chess game, not checkers, right? There's not just a jump here, jump here. It's in 20 moves from now. Where do we need to be? And where does our organization need to be to get a certain outcome? And the outcome's always changing, right? So changing goalposts, changing sequencing, that's where it's nerve-wracking for me. I spend a lot of time. I'm project manager by trade, so I'm also inclined to be able to sit there and do the Doctor Strange, millions of different things and come up with different ideas. So that's my answer.
Yeah. So aside from fundraising,
not allowed to talk about fundraising.
It's actually fundraising can be a lot of fun. I think my My biggest, let's say, pain point is waiting. You assume you're into a startup. You're like, oh, I'm in control of my own destiny. If I want that thing done faster, I can just go do it, or someone on my team can do it, and we can do that. And that's true for many things. But you have to collaborate with so many parties outside, whether it's legal or banking or employee services or counterparts for fundraising or the hire. Like there are so many things that and folks move at different speeds, right? So for me, one of the most nerve-wracking things is the waiting for for someone to get back to you on this. And it's because you're a customer and you're one of many customers. It's not like you have your captive in-house staff. So I'm not saying that the waiting is an unreasonable amount. What I'm saying is that, of course, you're like itching to like move really fast, and you're oftentimes waiting on parties outside the firm, and that can be super nerve-wracking. And then, of course, trying to find the right staff at the right time. We've had some people that were amazing and we're going to join, but we weren't in the right place to hire them yet, and they took on another gig. And that happens. You're like, but this person would have been the perfect person, the great person to work with. They would have really fit. So I think, Steve's point on sequencing, 100%. And then secondarily, I think the things out of your control, the waiting for things out of your control is like, it kills you a little bit each day. And then when it gets resolved, when that item comes in, it's like Christmas morning. So anyways, the waiting, I think, is painful.
And the next question is more for those that are looking to launch their own startup. So, what's one advice you would give someone that's thinking about launching their own startup? Like, don't do it, or or go for it.
Look, I would say that when I reached out to Steve and when I asked you for counsel so many times, Kit, a lot of it was the realization of, and there's a high degree of self-awareness. If you're not very self-aware, get self-aware before you start your company. Extremely important. But I think I have a pretty good degree of self-awareness that's improved a lot even since I started this journey. But recognizing the skill sets and the complementary nature of different people's personalities and skills is crucial at the beginning. Thinking about what's missing. We always talk about knowing what you don't know. Extremely important. Hey, that's not a skill I have. That's not something I'm strong in. I'm really strong over here. This guy or this gal that would be amazing to do this. So if you're thinking about embarking on your own, I would say think about very clearly, very self-aware on where you excel, where you don't, where you're passable, where you're not. What do you love to do versus things you don't love to do? And consider how you would supplement that, whether it's you being at the top and bringing in talent, or whether it's finding partners to start that journey with you. I think that is the first conversation after I want to maybe do this and I maybe have an idea. Or at the same time, it's finding how are you going to fill in those gaps to be successful? And it could be partners, or it could be, just finding the right team.
Yeah. So one piece of advice you're asking me to give. So I'm going to pull a Ronnie Dangerfield back to school. I'm going to answer your question in two parts. So the first one would be, when you think about an idea, to get to the next stage, it's all about making the idea become alive, right? So all ideas kind of exist in the same level. They don't do anything unless you take an action. So I worked for the CEO of Bank One back in the early 2000s, before he became the CEO of JP Morgan. Not dropping names, but what he used to always say is that there's a difference between a decision and an expression of desire. An expression of desire is everything has an expression of desire, but when you add an action to it, it becomes a decision, right? And so that action, just actually taking that action, is important. The second part of it is you're not alone, right? So there are a ton of people out there willing to give advice, including us. You can reach out to us, ask us our opinion. Obviously, hopefully you have a comfortable way of engaging with us now that you know our personalities. But there are a ton of people out there that are willing to give you advice. Get the advice, and start your journey. Just put it down on paper. You just got to get that first action to start your journey.
Yeah, I'm going to add one thing because I want to make sure I don't forget it. It's not about the starting of the journey. I mean, we answered your question about, or the audience's question about how to start and things that are important to start. But I'll tell you a little lesson I've had to learn along the way after starting. And that is making decisions faster. So Steve will smile because he was usually the one yelling at me to make decisions faster. You know, I have a certain process, right? Certain process that I like, a certain way, you know, my brain works. I mentioned earlier about rewiring. But it is way more beneficial to make a fast decision than it is to make the perfect decision. You'll read a lot about this, and of course you're going to mess up. You're absolutely going to mess up. I've messed up multiple times on this 2-year journey. But I think I've gotten better. I've really worked towards making decisions faster. I do like getting, bringing in and soliciting opinions from people because I want people to feel like they're part of a journey. You do have to do that, but you have to strike that right balance. And it's an art, not a science, at knowing what the right threshold is, that when you reach that, decision has to be made. Doesn't have to be in a second.
That's probably the best point that's been made on this. I mean, the ability to make decisions quickly is important because, you know, when same guy from that Bank One days, he used to then also say, you know, when he was asked, you know, you make a lot of decisions, you don't have a lot of information, a lot of time. What do? He's like, well, at the end of the year, you know, we look back and we hope we made more good ones than bad ones. But what's the most important thing to do is have that discipline to make decisions, right? It's the only thing that can give you business a chance to go forward. So yeah, that's an excellent point, John.
On that note, thank you so much, Steve and John. It's been phenomenal, and it's been a great pleasure for me to have the both of you as my first guests on the podcast. We have a lot of amazing feedback from the audience. So for those of you that are out there, whether you're running a startup, whether you have amazing ideas you want to share with the world, whether you're a capital allocator that wants to attract great startups to invest, that allow you to invest, that invite you to join the podcast where we connect people, ideas, and capital to make this world a better place. Now, if you are hearing this message, you've most likely listened to the entire podcast. And for that, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoy this new podcast and this new episode. And if you did, please click like, follow. Make sure to be on the lookout for the next episode where I'll be talking to Dwight Williams on the secret of longevity.
Hey,
have a blessed day. Yes.
Wait, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. I know it's your last thing, but I want to leave an Easter egg. Can we leave an Easter egg on your first podcast?
Of course you can.
So if people have listened to this, they get to actually hear us ask you a question. And Kit did not know I was going to do this. So Kit, you're embarking on this like amazing podcast journey. I'm super freaking psyched for you. What is, can you tell us a little bit other podcasts or creators that inspire you, and whose path do you hope to replicate, or whose mantra or message do you hope you can kind of channel in your own way, in your own spirit?
Wow, that's a tough question. I was advised not to create a podcast called Talk With Kiet because no one knows who the hell Kiet is. I was advised to not do a lot of things. And I follow a lot of great podcasters. But then, the reality is I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this because, since leaving IHS Market over the last, 4 or 5 months, I've had the most amazing conversations with people. And something clicked in my mind. And I literally had a conversation with someone at a coffee shop for 2-3 hours. And he inspired me to start this podcast because I was like, had I recorded this conversation, how many people would have benefited so much from this? Right. And if anything I do helps the lives of only one individual, then it's worth it. So I would say yes, I'm gonna learn tidbits of everyone that has an amazing podcast, but this is gonna be different. This is gonna be Kiet Tran on Kiet Tran's term and how I do it. And it may not follow the normal path of things, and everyone may find it odd and different in how I approach it, but fuck it, it's me. And
Sounds
that's why
good.
you're allowed to curse on this podcast. It's an adult channel.
Well, or I mean, you're maybe missing a spin-off opportunity. You could have Talk with Kiet after hours, and that could be the no holds barred version.
That's right. So, but then there will be another podcast version, which I can plug now, where I'll be doing a joint podcast with someone who's extremely talented, who's actually the CEO of Right Pedal Advisors. That's Kat. We're gonna have a podcast to talk about fintech, the thing I care the most about. I'm a fintech guy at heart, and we're gonna talk about the world of fintech. Definitely keep an eye out for that more. But for that, thank you, gents, and thank you everyone for listening. To our next one.
Thanks
Bye-bye,
for having us, Kit.
everybody.